This content is intended for mature audiences and may contain strong opinions or language. Views or opinions expressed by guests or the host should not be considered as medical, financial, legal, or psychiatric advice and are not to be attributed to this platform or its sponsors. Hello, wonderful people. Thank you for joining us on an episode of Bobbing Along with Bob featuring your host, bobdub. We are so glad you decided to join us for one of our discussions with many of our interesting and informative guests who are going to share their knowledge, insight, opinion, and most importantly, their life experiences with all of you. If you enjoy this content, please like and share as well as subscribe. Feel free to use the comment section to share your life experiences on today's topic. You can also find the host on minds.com/bobdub. And now, here is your host, bobdub.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Bobbing Along, and here I am again with Otto X of Minds.com, and we're looking at the movie Harvey. Hey Otto, how are you doing?
Oh, pretty good. How are you doing today, Roberta?
I'm doing pretty good. It's been a lovely, lovely sunny day here today.
Oh, nice.
So we're going to talk about Harvey again today, and we have looked at Harvey, the movie, quite a lot in terms of community and in terms of mental health and in terms of what is a pooka and things that are happening on the stage. But today I thought that I would focus in on asking you, Otto, what your opinion is of this entity that we've been calling Harvey.
The pooka.
The pooka.
And we have to remember the title of the film is Harvey. The title of the play was Harvey. And since I've read the script of the play, I'm constantly referencing back to that mentally. As the writers, that was her original conception of it. The play was originally called The Pooka.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, that was the original title of the play, The Pooka, and then it was changed to Harvey. So I'm not sure when she changed it, but I believe that was the. So I think, especially if the play is titled The Pooka, yes, Harvey is definitely the main character, and yet he never appears on the stage. And of course, my first thought is, and I probably brought this up before, the so-called negative theology of pseudo-Dionysus, or also known as Dionysus the Areopagite, or Areopagite. I don't know. I'm not good at pronouncing a lot of these words, but the whole idea of you can only understand divinity not through its positive aspects, which are beyond our understanding, but only through subtracting what it isn't. And in that sense, Harvey is we're made aware of Harvey by what isn't there. Rather by people's reactions to him and everything else. And as a character, Harvey, and I mean, he is definitely a character. He's the top character of the play. His presence is from the beginning to the end of the play. Harvey is a factor in everyone's lives around him. And Harvey is a classic Irish spirit, denizen of the invisible world, if you like. And these characters are invariably more powerful than human beings. They have an ability to perceive and manipulate time and space in ways we don't have. And they tend to be mischievous and yet very friendly to people that they like. And yet if you cross them, they can be, well, not very nice at all. And we kind of saw that with Harvey. But I think what strikes me of the character in the play, and I think obviously he's a literary creation. She softened him. He's not as cruel as the Irish folk tales tell of the people from the invisible world, the the fairies, the elves, whatever you want to call them, the spirits, they could strike people down, kill cattle, cause droughts and things if they were angered. People having strokes. Strokes were called elf shot. You were elf shot.
Wow.
Some folks have a cow failing to give milk, or a cow could suddenly get sick, and they would say, well, it was, it must have crossed a fairy line or disturbed the fairies, and it was with an elf bowl. Or sometimes the fairies, if a cow went dry, it was thought that the fairies were drinking the milk. They could absorb the goodness of like food and drink and even crops in the fields. The crops would be ruined. They wouldn't be good for humans anymore. So if you had a bad harvest in our world, it meant a good harvest in the spirit world, and vice versa. It's very, very strange kind of an outlook. But so Harvey is in the play and in the movie is not that harsh a character. In fact, he's very, very much she focused on the mischievous and playful side of these spirits, and in Harvey in particular, he is protecting his friend. He protects his friend, and I think that's one of the themes in that's the main theme, I think, in the film and in the play about Harvey, is that he's looking out for Elwood, and that's made plain by the statements by the other characters, and even in the movie, when the judge there, Judge Gaffney, orders one of his henchmen to go and delay Elwood so he couldn't interrupt the party. When they hear that it's Elwood P. Dowd, it's like everybody backs off. Oh, wait, we don't want to mess with him, because even people that don't believe in pookas or even know about them realize that you don't mess with Elwood because things happen to you. It's nothing Elwood does to you, but just if you try to harm Elwood Dowd or interfere with him, you're going to start having some bad luck. And and this is, of course, is Harvey's work. And so I get the feeling in the film that the character of Harvey is very protective of his friend. He's loyal to his friend, but he's also got a sense of humor, kind of the way a pleasant and only slightly mean drunk can be. There's a lot of alcohol in this film, too. There's a lot of that. And, of course, that's the whole Irish thing in part. Remember, Harvey is fond of rum pots and crack pots. And how are you tonight, Mr. Wilson? So there is that little bit of a drunken feel, or even better, there's a very, very good and Irish distinction, not drunken, but with drink taken. And definitely the character of Harvey is, you get the feeling that he's had a few, and he's being something of a smartass a lot of the time, as a smartass drunk can be sometimes, but it never verges over into anything really vicious. Although you could make arguments about Vita being dumped in the tub like that, but at the same time, that's what she was going to do to Elwood. So there was a lot of poetic justice in the things Harvey did. Mm-hmm. I noticed too. There's that balance. He's trying to maintain that balance. You want to put Elwood into this institution? Well, here's a taste of it yourself. Yeah. And he turned the tables on her, so that suddenly she's the one that's going through exactly what she was going to have done to Elwood. And of course, another aspect of the film was that, and we saw that at the end, and I think it was in the play, it was even more apparent that he really does love Elwood. And as you pointed out in the play, it's really Myrtle May who's putting the pressure on her mother to do this, in part through the mother's anxiety that her daughter won't be able to enter society properly, get the right start, but also Myrtle May. She wants to get Elwood locked away, sell the house, and move to a city where she can have a better social life. And you're right, she gets what she deserves in a sense with Wilson. Everybody kind of, there's a certain poetic justice in the way fates are handed out. By the end of the film. But yeah, so I get the character of Harvey, I get mischievousness, certainly the mischievous to the point of harming, even not badly, but like I say, having someone dumped in a tub, stark naked and going through those crazy things is that's a bit much. But on the other hand, it was exactly what she was going to have done to Elwood. So, but Harvey is protecting his friend. He really likes his friend. And he's gonna stick with him and stand between him and all these others that are trying to harm him.
it's very interesting for me how through the movie, from the beginning, the experience of going through the movie is an experience of learning to believe that Harvey is really there. At the beginning of the movie, it's just this invisible friend, and we're sort of catering to this weirdness. But by the end of the movie, the doors are opening on their own. So the thing that I wonder to myself is, what do we believe in when we go through that process? We now believe in Harvey. Does that mean that we somehow as humans have an ability to believe that there are supernatural creatures in the world around us? And do you believe that pookas are a thing, that we exist in a world with other creatures?
Well, I'm not quite so prejudiced as to ignore the evidence of my own senses. So I certainly think that there are other than human intelligences in the universe. That there's more in heaven and earth than are dreamt on in our philosophy. The process of the film and the play before that was very interesting in that, and this is obviously the result of a skilled writer who knows her craft. And when you're looking at a play, at a script, or watching a film, you have to realize that, unless it's an Ed Wood Jr. film, that every line, every part of the film, every part of the play has been consciously crafted in order to create a certain idea, a certain set of ideas in the viewer's or the reader's mind. So when she starts off the play and the movie with everybody, oh, poor Elwood, at the beginning of the film, you think, you say he's got an invisible friend. It's kind of cringe. Oh, my goodness, he's ruining his sister's party. The sister seems a little ditzy, but of course, what can you expect? And you are not given any evidence to suggest anything to the contrary, except that, Elwood is simply hallucinating this. And as you say, by the end of the movie, doors are opening and closing. She's kind of segued over into you're seeing more and more people, and through the film, people are being convinced more and more of the existence of Harvey. And Elwood's sister, Vida, is right from the start. We realize that her little snide remarks about Harvey are not so much absent-minded comments, or simply a bit of dizziness or tizziness, when she's upset, but in fact reflects the fact that she too has been experiencing Harvey. She too has seen Harvey, which she admits to the psychiatrist. And even if she doesn't see Harvey a whole lot, she firmly knows that he's there because of other effects that he has on the environment. Keep in mind, in Ireland, in most cultures that talk about these kinds of beings, they're not usually visible. And we know, for example, in Thailand and Burma and Buddhist countries, where they talk about the invisible worlds, sometimes called the ghost realms and the Deva realms. There are these different levels, but basically, I think a good shorthand term would be the invisible world. A world that we don't have direct access to with our senses. But as they talk about there, and as you know, in order to see beings of a higher vibration, beings that are on a higher moral, spiritual, or intellectual plane, we have to start thinking, feeling, and being in those ways. As Alexandra David Neal points out, a human being has human senses and is going to see the things that human senses see. A spiritual being is going to have spiritual senses and is going to see things that a spiritual being sees. And most of the time, there the twain shall meet. It's very rare for people from the invisible world and people from our physical world to interact directly. I mean, that's why it's so weird and scary and cognitively dissonant when it does happen to us, and why people to whom it does happen are like Elwood, and they're looked on rather askance. There was a time when Elwood would have been a shaman. He would have been the spiritual technician of the tribe. He would have been the one saying, oh, by the way, your aunt is going to be stopping by in a couple of days. And it happens. He's going to be the one making, minor prophecies or saying what the weather was going to be like. And when other people were attacked by spiritual beings, which is how many primitive societies interpret any sort of physical illness, he would be the one to consult, and he would have his spirit guide, Harvey, who would tell him, well, this, could make a spiritual diagnosis of what's happening on that plane. And if things like this are usually approached, since humans are physical as well as being physical, we don't have direct access to our senses to our non-physical selves, but yet they exist. So that in order to deal with an illness, yes, you have to deal with the physical part. So, you clean the wound and bandage or whatever. But obviously, the wound also means that this guy has bad luck and he's probably being attacked in the invisible world on that level. And so you need a technician of the invisible. So, well, how did he get that thing? So, he may have disturbed a site that was sacred to these guys. And that it happened in Ireland. I told you they would have a traditional story would be someone wants to extend their house. And a wise man is consulting. He says, well, there's like a ferry path, like a yard behind your back door. Don't block the ferry path. Don't build the house out that way. And they do. And somebody gets a stroke or somebody breaks a leg or something bad happens. They call someone and says, oh, well, you built the house over this. Well, we can split the leg, but you've also got to move the house, or you've got to do this or leave food out or do some other spiritual exercise, or perhaps call in a priest to do a blessing. That's another, you can either try to placate these spirits, or you can try to drive them out. And that's where exorcism comes in. And that's another thing you'll find in Irish folklore, where you call for the priest and the holy water, bell, book, and candle and all that. So Elwood would have been a spiritual technician, I think, in another society. But in our society, he's looked at askance as somebody mentally ill. And of course, by the end of the film, we're all, like I say, we're seeing the doors open and this and that. But before then, we've seen Harvey's effect on everyone around him. So, but as to the actual existence of these things, I can get really hyper philosophical about this and say that everything that we perceive is through our sensoria. And these are all organized through different models. And the idea of an invisible world and interacting with pookas and pixies and brownies and whatnot, this is a way of modeling our interaction with the universe, much as we use physics to model the universe. Punadama was talking about quantum physics and the everyday world. And I was thinking about that because for example, in Newtonian physics, Newtonian mechanics, which we use today, that's our day-to-day. If you're launching a satellite into orbit or launching a probe to another planet, you use Newtonian mathematics. A moving object tends to stay in motion unless acted around by an outside force. An object at rest tends to stay at rest, and you can do the math and tell exactly how much force against so much mass is going to produce so much acceleration and all these things. But the Newtonian model, the upshot of all of these numbers and ways of predicting the future, was that the math seemed to show, for example, that objects are attracted to each other. That if something is very massy, like the Earth, and something isn't very massy, like a small, little meteoroid, if it is easily pulled into the Earth's gravitational field, the Earth attracts the small meteor and then it burns up in the atmosphere. A meteoroid is what's in space. When it hits the atmosphere and burns, it becomes a meteor. And then if anything is left to hit the ground, that's a meteorite. So meteorites result from the Earth attracting these things. Well, we go to Einstein and nothing is attracting anything else. His math talks about how mass warps space and time. However, it warps these things in ways we can't perceive directly, much as we can't perceive the spirit world directly. And so it's because of this curvature of space and time that causes the meteoroid to, in a manner of speaking, roll down the slope. I've heard it called being in the gravity well. If the Earth distorts you've probably seen the model they do. They take 4 dimensions and reduce them to like 3 dimensions, lay a rubber sheet pretending to be space-time, and you put a great big rock on it, and it bends it so it goes deep, deep into it. And if you roll a marble, it'll be sucked into that well that it's created. So again, here's something else entirely. Now, the behavior is exactly the same. The mathematics used will describe the things exactly, just as accurately, and predict their future course, acceleration, rate of descent through an atmosphere, whatever your problem is. It can make all the same predictions, and yet these are two entirely different models, and they are simply models. So you can say that the Earth attracts things, or you can say that a gravity well has things slide down it. But both of these are simply metaphors. They're ways we have of thinking about something that we really can't perceive directly. And it's the same thing, I think, with the invisible world. When we interact with these beings, pookas and brownies and whatnot, in the same way, we are interacting with metaphor. And in this case, one that can communicate with us and talk back to us. That's when it gets really weird. Jacques Vallée talked about when you're trying to study the UFO phenomenon, which is, as he points out, and any honest researcher will tell you, is intimately related to all paranormal activities, whether it's Sasquatch, poltergeists, ghost sightings, levitations, precognition, teleportation, levitation. All of these things are on a continuum with UFOs and things. He says, when you're trying to study this, it's one thing to study something like gravity, which, you can study and do the math on because it's simply there and it's a force. But when you're studying the paranormal, this is something that doesn't want to be studied. This is something that actively tries to hide from you. Science isn't prepared for that. Yeah. Science is prepared to put up a telescope and look. Science isn't like used to we're trying to focus this on the star, but the star keeps darting out of the telescope's field of view, or pulling clouds in front of it, or creating an atmospheric lens that distorts the picture and makes us think it's somewhere else. So when we're talking about the invisible world, I think it's important to remember that we're dealing with something that is completely beyond our ability to comprehend in terms of our normal experience. And so we are creating a way to understand it metaphorically. We're looking at things as through a glass darkly, if you like. And we have to look through the glass in order to see it, and the glass is going to create distortions, but these distortions will form an image, and we can focus on that image. If it's an image of a pooka, even if it's an image of a 6 foot 3 inch white rabbit.
It's really fascinating. One of the things that I think that we mentioned last week a little bit was that Mary Chase was also a Catholic, and that there are ways that you can see in the script, you can see the influence of her Catholic faith, and that in some ways Harvey could be seen as a metaphor for God, shall we say, where Elwood says, they tell me their problems, and then I introduce them to Harvey, and Harvey is so grand that everything falls into perspective. But, there's also the idea that these are just a lot of philosophical questions that Mary Chase came up with because they were in the middle of the Second World War, and she was seeing the death of these young men all around her and the influence it was having on the mothers. But then at another level, she did write a comedy, specifically to write a comedy. So grappling with these really big questions about God and philosophy and all these things, it makes me wonder, is this the power of comedy? Is this what comedy brings into our life? Is this doorway maybe into the spiritual world where we can look at these questions, pookas and devas and gravity?
An actual world that was kind of Plato's thing. And he got that from the Pythagoreans. again, I think it's when we're trying to grasp something, we have to grasp it in terms of what we already understand. So, I'm dancing around this. Can you tell? Because I hate to.
It's tricky.
Yes, there are pookas.
It's tricky.
Yes, there are spiritual beings. Well, to say that with our training in reductionism, physical science. Excuse me, I'm getting messages here.
No problem.
Getting messages from the ether. These phones are like. Here we go. Sorry.
No props.
Messages from the ethers. My friend says this technology is like giving us Dewa powers. We can communicate. But yeah, it's when it comes down to it, yeah, I can argue, and as you know, I'm sure that anyone can argue that we're not actually real. We can just make a very good argument that we're just a brain in a jar, and that everything that we experience is simply a product of some scientist somewhere, like sticking voltages through our brain or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that if something looks like a duck and quacks like a duck and swims and flies like a duck and sheds water off its back like a duck, well, it simply must be a swan. And
that's how my mind works.
I think the question of the reality of pookas. Yeah, I think they're real, and but I think a lot of it has to do with probability. I think the only thing in physics that has really come close to touching this is quantum mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
The whole fact that consciousness, not an AI program, not a black hole, not a physical, a piece of matter that's so dense it can punch a hole in the universe. Ultimately, it's consciousness. It's our observation of the universe that creates it, basically. And that's an immensely, no wonder Einstein hated that. Einstein hated quantum mechanics. I mean, aside from the fact that it made the physics he'd invented obsolete within just a few years, whereas Newton's got to stand for centuries. So I think he was a little pissed about that. He could never accept this. He hated the idea, and he refused left, right, and sideways. So when actual reality depends upon your observation, and when you start talking about things being probable, probability can be altered in ways that we don't really we cannot understand using simply the law of averages. Because the law of averages does not explain luck. Mm-hmm. When people are extraordinarily lucky, like Elwood was, and like people befriended by, in traditional Irish stories, people that are befriended by these people from the invisible world, they tend to be very, very lucky. And luck has to do with time and space. It gets back to that whole thing in the encyclopedia, where when you change something and it's always been there. You make the change all through time to the point where you even remember it, having been there. Sort of like that. Remember that Lafferty short story? I don't know if you remember reading it or if I gave it to you to read, about these people that were experimenting with time.
Yes.
And it's like, well, we're going to change time. We're going to do this. And then it changes everything. And they're like, well, everything's the same. Let's do it again. And yet underneath it all, there was a part of them that was aware of it. And I think we can sometimes kind of touch that. But yeah, it's the probability factor that gets me. I think that's why people have to be alone or with only a very few people before they have an encounter with a Sasquatch or a Yeti. That's why people tend to be alone or in small groups when they have close encounters with flying saucers and things like that, because it's improbable for a lot of people to experience such a thing. And yet, depending on how the quantum wave function collapses, anything, literally anything, is possible. I think that was one of the powers of the Taoists. They talked about the Taoist sage who was basically an incredibly lucky guy. He'd go through the jungle. Tigers wouldn't eat him. He wouldn't be, bitten by poisonous reptiles, not because he had some power over them, because he would always happen to not be where they were going to be. That's the way the quantum envelope crumbles. That's the way the cookie collapses. Mm-hmm. And Punadama brought this up too. He said that if a being could be sufficiently advanced, or not even necessarily advanced, but on another level. Advanced makes it sound like a race of some sort. You're racing ahead, but a being on another level or a unique level could collapse the quantum envelope however they wanted it to collapse. Mm. And that opens up, quote unquote, miracles. That opens up the idea of 6.5 foot tall white rabbits. That opens up the idea of hitting every green light in a row when you're trying to get somewhere in a hurry. It also opens up hitting every red light when you want to get somewhere. And then when you do get there, you find out you're there perfectly on time. And if you'd gotten there earlier, it would have been a disaster.
Yes.
And things that we can't even imagine, because if we're talking about altering space and time, our memories, our thought processes are dependent upon the forward movement of the arrow of time. So even though we might be able to manipulate time beyond that, we won't be able to detect it consciously. There may be aspects of ourselves that could understand this, but they wouldn't be able to understand it in a way that we could explain to ourselves rationally. Thus, pookas, thus spirits and poltergeists and things like that. You would expect this sort of thing in a world where you had, quantum mechanics running things, and not just at the micro level, because really what we're talking about here are macro level quantum effects. But it seems to me that if quantum physics rules at the micro level, then there has to be some upshot in or at the micro level, there has to be an upshot in the macro level where we're living and paying attention. Mm. I think.
Sorry, carry on.
Oh, no, I was just saying, I think they're real. I think pookas are real.
Mm. I thought that it was fascinating when I was listening to that talk of Punadama's that you were referencing earlier, the one about quantum physics that he did last week. I thought that it was fascinating in that where he said that consciousness was there before everything else. And I know that might be quite an old thought to a lot of people, but that's a brand new thought to me. I've only been playing with that thought for the last sort of year or so. And it's fascinating to me that it is consciousness that creates so much of what we perceive in our world, like our own consciousness of what's going on around us makes us believe or not believe in certain things. For if Harvey didn't exist, I mean, in the play, when they were doing the play and they were putting on the play, there was no Harvey in the cast with them. He didn't exist. And
right. They did not need an actual actor. There was no actor playing Harvey on the stage, although he had top billing.
Yes. And in their reality of what they were doing night after night, putting on that play, they were acting not just those characters, but Harvey. Everything about that was make-believe. And that's a new thing that I'm discovering as discovering that consciousness was there before everything, is that what we believe is there, we behave as if it is there. And so you can behave as if a good thing is there or a bad thing is there. And that's interesting that what you were saying earlier, that the traditional Irish perception of the pooka acknowledged that what you believed about it and how you behaved towards it created those circumstances. Is that what you talk about when you talk about becoming, Otto?
Well, in a sense, becoming is when you're, I wish I had the technical definition at my fingertips. I was actually just listening to a Dhamma talk talking about becoming today. But becoming is when you are basically, I always think of it as a sort of a daydream, it can be, but where you fit your idea of yourself into a worldview. You know, when you sit and you think, you know, here I am, and I mean, I know a guy who's a performance artist, and he just sits there, and in his head, his little becoming is he's the greatest, and everything he does is wonderful. And if anyone in the audience doesn't care about it, well, they don't know anything. Those guys have no idea, you know. And it has very little to do with his actual ability. He's not. I'm not going to say who it is because you might hear this. You know who you are. And well, no, he doesn't. That's heard this. He'd have no idea. But it's just that it takes you away from the actual world. It creates a world in and of itself within your mind. And when a lot of people share becoming, yeah, you know, when you were talking about how you can behave as if something good is there, or you can behave as if something as bad is there, and something good will be there after a while, because your behavior creates things, brings things about. So,
and brings your beliefs about. I find it, you know, the way they did the movie with the doors opening and closing at the end was a very powerful part for me. That up until the doors opened and closed on their own, it was all about whether I believed it or not. But as soon as there was external evidence, it changed the nature of the make-believe, and it brought the nature of the supernatural into question, into focus, I suppose, in the movie. The idea of people acting as if things are real.
Yeah. You know, again, when they were, you know, it must have been a great film or a great play to act in, and a great film to act in, too. But I was thinking about what you were saying about the actors are going on there every night. There's no Harvey, and yet, in a sense, all of their actions create a Harvey. And, like, you know, by the end of the play, as well as the movie, doors are opening. We're being given actual physical evidence of the pooka. But on the other hand, you could also say, well, it's just doors opening. Maybe a train went by. Could be just coincidence. Maybe the wind blew the door, you know. Maybe it's just coincidence the wind blew when everybody was thinking that there was a rabbit coming into the room, kind of deal. But people created the Harvey character through their, again, it's sort of like Chiaroscuro, you know, where it's like everything, where the design is brought forth out of the shadow, kind of thing. It's like when you remove things from something. Well, like I was saying before about the what do they call that? Apophatic theology, where all you can do is like peel stuff away. And Harvey is very powerful in his absence, and through his absence, he's omnipresent almost. And that touches on that idea you had about Harvey being a godlike figure.
Mm. Yes, that's interesting to me too. I wonder how much her Catholic faith did influence what she was trying, her message that she was trying to get across. Because, I mean, it's obvious that there's a strong message of comfort and love and purpose and meaning, all sorts of things within the play.
There is. And, you know, of course, I don't think she could be overtly religious. I mean, when you're writing a play like that in a movie, unless it's like a specific kind of play like The Bells of St. Mary's or Father Brown Mystery, you're probably going to try to keep it as ecumenical as possible. You know, you don't want it to be, pigeonholed. You know, this is a Catholic play. This is a Catholic movie or whatever. So any religious ideas would be presented in a more general way, I think.
Yes.
There's certainly a quality there of forgiveness. There's certainly, you could even say, qualities of redemption. And I'm thinking of when you've got Elwood, who is, in a sense, a harmless helping, you could say, arguably a Christ-like figure who is informed by this invisible spirit, arguably the Holy Spirit, and who is bringing comfort to drunkards and sinners when he's confronted with the idea. And again, in a play written in the 30s, or what was it, or excuse me, in the 40s, and filmed in 1950, when the young psychiatrist and the nurse, we made a terrible mistake, or we made an error here. Oh, you did. And, Jimmy Stewart does all the wonderful facial expressions, which we see the stage directions for in the play. He's there comforting the people who are of dubious morality. And you've got the sister who betrays him, really is, or at least is trying to betray him to Chumley, a very Pilate-like figure in some ways. Now that you bring it up, I can kind of see it's not an exact parallel. But and then Chumley, of course, who in the play it's more clear, he wants to have that rabbit, he wants to steal that away, but you cannot buy. That's the sin of Simon Magus. Purchasing the Holy Spirit. So he just wants Harvey so he can go to Akron and have one last fling. I thought that was a very revealing line in the play that they didn't put in the film. So his in the film, I think they made him a bit more sympathetic. In the play, you could tell he was just basically hungering after more unskillful pleasurings. It wasn't even, in the movie you have the idea of like, here's this man, he's crushed under the burden of this. He simply wants some relief from the burden. In the play, it's like, I want one last fling. Yeah. It was more of just a short-term kind of a party, and he'd want to do it again. After it wore off, a few weeks later, he'd be asking Harvey to go to Akron again. Yes. Whereas Wood was happy to be hanging out wherever he was and having a grand old time. And yes, people would bring him his problems, and he would show them the Spirit, and it was so much bigger and grander. So actually, now that you bring it up, you could of course, you could start arguing from Jungian terms that it is sort of a universal story, but I think you can find some biblical parallels.
Well, it's another thing that's interesting about it is that all these deep things that we're talking about, and these deep philosophical questions and searchings and meanings and relationships, it could be that we're reading this into it. It could be that Mary Chase just wrote a comedy.
Oh, yeah. But, the thing is, and this is one of the things I agree with Oscar Wilde about, an artist is often the last person to really ask about what the meaning of their art is. Artists are too busy creating. They don't have really the time to explore or even to properly understand the ramifications of everything they do. In fact, that would often spoil their work. Artists are basically creators, and their creation comes from well springs that even they themselves cannot plumb. It's up to the critic, who can understand these things, to explain it to the artist. And I mean, that does sound kind of, on the face of it, it sounds a bit cavalier and arrogant. But at the same time, I have seen that artists who create something that is so much more than they intended or even they themselves understand. But I think in her case, she was definitely trying to write a comedy, trying to write something comforting. I think when she was writing it, ideas that were deep within her rose up. But as far as any of these deeper meanings, yes, certainly reading them into the art, they don't have to be intentionally put in there for them to be there. The artist does a lot of things unintentionally. You remember Aleister Crowley in Book 4 wrote that little interlude of taking regular just nursery rhymes at random and reading into them these deep mystical, occult, and magical meanings, to things like he read a Buddhist meaning into Peter Pumpkin Eater.
Oh, yes.
That was Buddhist parable. And as he said, how did he put it in the book? He said, if the reader thinks that I believe that these things have no meaning in them at all, then he's one stupid kind of fool. If the reader thinks that I think these were deliberately written to have a meaning in them, then he's another stupid kind of fool.
Okay.
You do read the meaning into them, but that doesn't mean the meaning isn't there.
Yes. Yes.
That makes sense. And I just heard a rumble of thunder the moment I said that.
Ooh, drum roll.
And I can actually find the exact quote. Here it is. Peter Pumpkin Eater had a wife and couldn't keep her. He put her in a peanut shell. There he kept her very well. And his interpretation is this authentic text of the Theravada school of Buddhism is much esteemed even today by the more cultured and devoted followers of that school. The pumpkin is, of course, the symbol of resurrection, as is familiar to all students with the story of Jonah and the gourd, which means the whale, I think. Peter is therefore the Arhat who has put an end to a series of resurrections. That he's called Peter is a reference to the symbolizing of Arhats as stones in the great wall of the guardians of mankind. His wife is, of course, by the usual symbolism, his body, which he could not keep until he put her in a peanut shell, the yellow robe of a bhikkhu. But I think we read these things into them, but I think they are there. And I think artists create more than they are consciously aware of, because they're drawing on a lot of what they've learned, their backgrounds, their studies over the years, stuff that they don't consciously remember, but it goes into the creation of their work. I remember an interview with Patrick McGowan. In fact, I posted some of the interview up on Minds, but I got a really interesting, rare little interview, and he was talking about The Prisoner, the television show he did. Had a lot of attention. And I should watch it again. I don't remember the details, but I remember this. He was basically had made the show as he was very much a libertarian, very much into individual freedom, and he saw that society versus the individual was the issue that he was talking about in that series, and that was his concern. And, to put it very broadly, and he talked about the tales of it, but he basically had a lot of the concerns that many of us do today. And some guy in the audience was bringing up something about the character of the butler in the series, played by Angelo Muscat, who's a very, very short character. And he was trying to, ask if he had deliberately drawn parallels with one of the dwarven characters in something by the Fairy Queen, Spencer, Edmund Spencer's work. And, coming with this whole thing of this, and it was like, you can tell McGowan was like, I was just trying to, put across this message, and the message should be apparent in what I did. But this kid who was obviously an English major had drawn on like his own, whatever, Spencer and all of the writers that he was looking at, and had drawn all these amazing parallels that McGowan was not thinking of at all, and yet they were there.
Yes,
sort of thing. Although I think McGowan was a little frustrated with him at the time. I'll have to watch that interview again. I don't remember the exact situation, but that was the gist of it, though. Basically, on your background and how things resonate with you. And really good literature will do that. I mean, really good literature like Shakespeare, and like Harvey, like that we've been talking about this far, it'll say things to you, and it'll say things to me, and it'll say things to people separated from us in time and space, and it'll say independent things. We'll each get something different out of it, but we'll each get something very rich and very authentic from it. The author doesn't have to write in each association for us. She has to create something which is, do I want to say mythic, archetypal enough? Something that is true enough in relation to the human condition that we can relate to it and see how it connects to our lives and our experience. And I think that's what we're there. So, yes, the author did mean for it to be there, but she didn't mean for that that specific thing to be there.
Yeah.
The deal.
Yes. It's fascinating. You know, one of the things that I only discovered after we'd been talking about it for a while was that she had written the play, for the woman whose son had been killed in action in the Second World War. And that was a huge thing for me. I was already very involved in the play and in the story, but really from the perspective of looking at mental health. And I really enjoyed this whole narrative that was going on of who were the mentally healthy people in society. And then when I realized that she had written it to cheer this lady up, a whole other level of relevance came into the play for me because of my grief and my trying to deal with my child's passing. And the thing that just keeps coming back to me over and over again and that I'm trying to deal with and don't really know how to process is it relevant? Is it helpful to try and cheer somebody up when they're in the middle of grief? Should grief continue and be worked through, or should it be interrupted by a comedy, by a pooka? Like, that's basically what was happening in the pub. Elwood was talking to people about their grief, their trauma, or their tragedy. It was almost as if his mother had died. He'd stopped being, what did he say?
Normal.
That his mother had said to him, always be clever, and if you can't be...
Or he said, in this world, you can either be clever or kind.
Or kind.
I think that was...
Yes. And he decided to walk away from cleverness and into kindness. Yeah. And she obviously was a very kind woman to be able to, she's written a very, very sympathetic play, but for the purpose that she wrote it also is very kind. It's sort of, as you said, layers and layers and layers of stuff that's not written into it, but that's there.
Yeah. Well, interrupting grief is part of working through grief.
Oh, interesting.
And when the Eloisian Mysteries were celebrated, we don't know a lot of it, but we do know some. And it included a ritual procession. These things often did, which recreated the grief of the goddess Demeter. Mm-hmm. Now, important part of the ceremony, Demeter's daughter was kidnapped, raped. They said then, of course, rape at that time meant steal, to rape away the rape of the Sabine women. They were carried off, basically.
Yes.
So the rape of Persephone, and her daughter had been stolen from her. She was very sad and upset, grief-stricken, traveling the earth. And the Eloisian procession duplicated that. And there was a point where in the procession where the goddess is sitting and she's her I forget the chiton, the clothing that the Greek woman wore was like over her head, and she was like very sad. And Balbo, a character named Balbo, a dwarfish. These characters are usually dwarfish. A female character, and performed ludicrous dances, sort of like the satire play or the jig after an Elizabethan or Jacobean drama, and basically did ridiculous Beavis and Butthead level kind of, oops, who put that turtle kind of level stuff, and got Demeter to laugh.
Right.
And part of it was the deep grief, but grief which at a certain point becomes almost purely intellectual, because it becomes suffering rather than pain in the Buddhist sense, because nothing is actually poking you. The grief, the event that happened is over, long over. And what's torturing you now is your thoughts of what happened, not what happened. You might have stepped on a nail and got your foot infected and had to have your foot cut off. Well, the foot's been cut off and it's healed and you've got a decent prosthetic, and who knows if it's far enough in the future, maybe they'll grow another one. So if you're still grieving about that, it's something that's happening on the level of mental anguish and mental suffering. And then Demeter, who is, on that level, is brought back to earth by the very earthy Beavis and Butthead kind of, look, it's longer than it is wide.
Right.
The sort of very basic, down to earth, literally earthy humor, basically reconnecting with the body awareness. We're getting back into Buddhism right there. When you stick with the breath, the body awareness, and you're here and now. And here and now can be bloody hilarious. It's also bloody miserable and dukkha, but it's also the human condition. You got to laugh, really. And that's part of the grieving process, is breaking the grief and breaking out of the mental suffering and breaking back into the world of the body, where all we have to deal with is pain rather than suffering. And suffering is much worse.
Mm.
Most things don't hurt as much as we think they do.
Yeah.
And I think I've told you I've sustained several traumatic injuries over the years. And one of the things that always struck me about them is that they didn't really hurt very much. I've been shot. Didn't hurt. Didn't hurt. I've been stabbed. I've had traumatic head injury. None of these things really hurt. I mean, afterward there were aches and pains, but the greater pain for me is something long, drawn out, and less extreme. Like my arthritis gives me more pain.
Right.
Right. I suffer from that. It's a dull ache, and it's there with me almost every day. Or my bad hips, things like that. I'm going to start complaining about all my, hey, illness, death. This is what I've got going on here. I shall change, become different.
Yes, indeed.
Grow apart from all that I would prefer.
Yeah.
But these things pale in comparison with the mental suffering that I can give myself over them.
Yes.
And that's part of interrupting the grief, because there is, as the Buddha said, there is a point to grief up to but that point only goes so far. After a while, it can become unskillful, and that's when you have to have the insight, the clarity to say, okay, this isn't skillful anymore. It's not helping anyone, and it's in fact hurting people. And you have to turn away from the suffering. When the pain turns into suffering, then we can do something about it.
Yes.
And so and I think that's reflected in Demeter's tale, and I think that was one of the good things about Harvey. You need comedy, and again, we would have the satire play. You would watch one of those Greek tragedies, and I'm sure you've read some of those. They're terrible things, people dying and betraying each other, and whole dynasties wiped out, and horrible war and mutilations and stuff. Although they were good enough to do all that stuff off stage, I do hardly approve of that. And leave it be, eliciting pity and terror from the audience, and people would be tearing at their clothes and all upset. And then afterward, you'd have the satire play, and you'd have basically a couple of people come up and tell very rude jokes and do very silly dances and wear stupid costumes. And by the end of it, everyone would be laughing. They would be releasing the tension, all of the built up anger and upset at Hecuba. And who is he to Hecuba, or Hecuba to him? One of my favorite lines from Hamlet, where the actor, there's a becoming for you. There's a becoming for you.
Yes.
Where they're going on at the fall of Troy, and the tears are running down the listener's eyes, and they just go, those damn Greeks destroying our beautiful Troy, and this and that, and it's like, this has nothing to do with you. You're an Elizabethan English person, or in the play, you're a Danish person, So that's something that is an important part of grief, is the ending of it, the breaking of it. That is getting through grief, because just perpetuating it, I think it's not good just to perpetuate things for the sake of perpetuating things, although it does sell a lot of anti-anxiety drugs and keeps a lot of shrinks in business. But there comes a time when these things have to be interrupted, and laughter is a really good way to do that. Laughter reconnects us with a lot on a very basic level, very earthy level. That's where we're at, this earthy level,
Right. Yes. Yes. Living right in the moment, the now.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And living in our bodies with breath. The bodily fabrication of breath, which is that wonderful, wonderful handle we have. It's something that is it's able to be consciously controlled and yet operates automatically at the same time. It's a very strange sort of a thing, the breath. And that brings us to bodily awareness. And then we realize we are we're this body. We got this decrepit thing that's like, rotting away and turning gray and doddering along and gets hungry and needs to have clothes changed and a house provided for it and all these other things. This is the down to earth every day, got to get food, got to get water, got to feed the cat. When we get back to this moment, this right here, right now, this body, this cat, I'm looking at this cat right now. She's being such a good cat, so quiet, sitting right next to me today.
And I've got Reginald jumped up on my lap. So we obviously have cat moments today, sharing a cat.
Yes. I see these cats don't have existential despair. These cats don't suffer the way we do. They have pains and they have aches and stuff, I'm sure, and disappointments and frustrations, but they can teach us a lot.
Yes.
The cat can bring us back to right here. Cats don't grieve. They do, but not like we do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, Otto, I would like to thank you very, very much, in fact, from the bottom of my heart, for being here with me for the last hour and interrupting my grief. Because I must say that it is, in fact, a wonderful, wonderful thing to be right here, right now, in the presence of another person talking. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful show. I've learned so many interesting things from you. So thank you very much indeed for that.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you very much for having me. I've also enjoyed this a great deal, and I've had a wonderful time sitting here with another person and with another cat and hanging out and talking of these things. And you got me going on some ideas I hadn't even thought about thinking. So I think it's been very fun. I can't wait till next week when we can go even further into this.
Thank you for listening to Bobbing Along with bobdub. If you enjoy content like this, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Or better yet, come and join us on minds.com/bobdub. If you are not already a member on Minds, get a free account on this open source social media platform. We look forward to seeing you next week for another episode of Bobbing Along with Bob. And if you can't wait a week, you can find older shows here on this channel. Goodbye, everyone.
Bobbing, bobbing, bobbing along, bobbing along. Bobbing, bobbing along, bobbing along.